Good evening wherever you're watching from, Kenya, Africa and beyond. Welcome to Africa Vision Voices. Now this is where your voice matters, and most importantly, we delve into the African narrative, the African story and the development idea. Now this episode is produced by Imani Radio and TV Ministries in conjunction with Good News Production Africa. Besides, my name is Francis Msakani. Now this week on the Visionaries Conversation, we host Joram Mwinamo. He is a strategic consultant. He shares his insights about the biggest problem in Africa, his thoughts on the African education system, its challenges and associations with the European culture. What are the notable downsides? How do we get through them as a people of Africa? Plus, Africa's top 10. Now this week we look at the African healthcare system. We share the figures associated with the healthcare providence in Africa. Specifically, we focus on the top 10 African cities providing top-notch health services in the continent. Now, figures provided by Nambio will help us celebrate the great milestones associated with health in Africa. You're watching Africa Vision Voices. I'm Francis Msakali. Stay with us. You're watching Africa Vision Voices. Tonight, I look at top African developments and news. Let's begin. The Burkinabe government adopted on Wednesday a bill revising constitution and henceforth enshrining national languages as official languages in place of French, which is relegated to the rank of working language. The report of the Council of Ministers specifies that this bill is part of the realization of the main missions of the transition, which consists of the initiating political, administrative, and institutional reforms to strengthen the culture democratically and consolidate the rule of law. Let's listen in.
Burkina Faso's government on Wednesday adopted a bill revising its constitution to enshrine the country's indigenous languages as official ones in place of French. French, which has been the official language for over a century, has now been relegated to the rank of working language. The bill must still be voted on by the Transitional Legislative Assembly before being signed into law. The country's ruling junta came to power in a coup in September 2022, and earlier this year promised a partial modification of the constitution. It comes following months of worsening relations between France and Sahelian countries. Earlier this year, Mali also established national languages as official ones in the country's updated constitution, similarly removing French. Burkina Faso has steadily severed ties with France, while deepening ties with Moscow. The country has also moved closer to neighbouring Mali and Niger, with the three countries recently proposing an alliance of Sahel states.
Now, Egypt is busy preparing for the presidential election, which will take place on Sunday 10th to Tuesday 12th. The result expected to be announced on December 18th. The outcome is seen as a foregone conclusion, with the incumbent President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi expected to win a third term, despite growing social discontent as the country's economic situation worsens. Egypt's voters will choose between Sisi, who has been in power since 2013, and three other candidates who remain mostly unknown to the general public. Let's listen in.
Egypt is preparing for its presidential election that should see incumbent President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi win a third term, despite growing social discontent as the country's economic situation worsens. From December 10th to 12th, Egyptians will choose between Sisi, who has been in power since 2013, and 3 other candidates, who remain mostly unknown to the general public. In the Arab world's most populous country, with a population of around 106 million, preparations for the election are extensive, with some 9,400 polling stations, 15,000 justice employees mobilized, and a voting period spread over 3 days. The results will be announced on December 18th, unless a second round has to be organized. This, however, is unlikely. In the last elections held in 2014 and 2018, Sisi won 96% of the vote. While the president's supporters say the election is free and fair, posters and banners for Sisi and his party are everywhere. Posters for other candidates, meanwhile, are few and far between.
A former president of Sierra Leone has been called in for questioning by police over recent attacks that officials say is or was a failed coup. Now, the police summoned ex-president Ernest Bai Koroma to its headquarters for questioning on the failed attempted coup that took place on November 26th. And of course, this was reported by the Information Minister Chano Ba, who said so in a statement. Koroma led the West African nation for 11 years until 2018, has been asked to appear before the Criminal Investigations Department in the capital, Freetown, within 24 hours. Now, the Information Ministry said that his summon follows the earlier arrest of his former security aide. Let's listen in.
The former president of Sierra Leone has been called in for questioning by police over recent attacks authorities termed as a failed coup, an official said Thursday. Ernest Bai Koroma said that he would honor the police summons and asked his supporters to be calm, according to a statement issued by his office. Dozens of gunmen launched an attack on November 26th in the West African nation's capital, during which they broke into Sierra Leone's key armory and into a prison where the majority of the more than 2,000 inmates were freed. 21 people died in the fighting, including 18 members of the security forces, the Information Minister said. The predecessor of President Julius Maada Bio strongly condemned the attack when it happened. 71 people were arrested in connection with the Freetown attack. Koroma's summons follows the earlier arrest of his former security aide. The 70-year-old was in office between 2007 and 2018. Although he has officially retired from politics, Koroma remains an influential figure within his political party and often hosts prominent politicians in his hometown of Makeni.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Thursday warned of the vicious threat the transnational organized crime poses to the world peace, security, and sustainable development. Speaking to the UN Secretary Council in New York, Guterres said that the issue affected the entire globe. The UNSG spoke about the impact of illicit financial flows, saying they amounted to billions of missed development opportunities, lost livelihoods, and worsened poverty. Let's listen in.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on Thursday warned of the vicious threat that transnational organized crime poses to the world's peace, security, and sustainable development.
The activities of transnational organized crime take many forms, but the ramifications are the same: weakened governance, corruption and lawlessness, open violence, death and destruction. Illicit financial flows are not abstract figures. They amount to billions of missed development opportunities, lost livelihoods and worsened poverty. On the African continent alone, more money is lost due to tax evasion, money laundering and illicit financial flows than comes in through official development assistance.
The executive director for the UN Office on Drugs and Crime also addressed the UN Security Council.
Around the world, illicit markets are expanding and diversifying. All threats persist, from booming cocaine markets to illicit firearms flowing into volatile areas. And emerging challenges proliferate, with synthetic drugs and cybercrime evolving faster than the world can keep up.
The director urged the council to address the issue, adding that transnational organized crime underpins many of the peace and security challenges it works on.
You're watching Africa Vision Voices. Time for a quick historical fact and back timeline about the great continent of Africa. Now this week, we continue with the Kenyan colony. We take a look at the Mau Mau's shaped up, how they shaped up and stood ground against the colonial rule. Very insightful. Let's have a look.
Been forced to declare a state of emergency.
In Nairobi, capital of Kenya, Europeans and Africans still walk the streets in fear of the dreaded Mau Mau. Troops are in the streets of Nairobi. Sir Evelyn Baring, the governor, salutes the men of the Lancashire Fusiliers who have flown in to help clear his colony of the Mau Mau menace, which has struck fear into Kenya's very heart. Nairobi police have been supplemented by hundreds of civilians, many of them women, to help round up the Mau Mau bandits. Radio-controlled cars with armored vehicles are used to carry out the army's plans for bringing in all suspects. More than 3,500 have been arrested already. All have to be carefully checked by police security men, for in such a decisive swoop as this, it is all too easy for the innocent to suffer.
The emergency, which was expected to last for a few weeks, went on for 7 years. It took the lives of at least 15,000 Africans, none of whom could possibly have had anything to do with Mau Mau, for Mau Mau never existed.
All who carry the mark of the Mau Mau must be hunted out so that peace may come to this troubled colony.
At the end of the Second World War, Kenya's Africans were impatient with colonialism. They had been ruled by Britain for 50 years with little to show for it. In the rural areas, they were confined to overpopulated reserves. In the towns, thousands were homeless. They were not permitted to elect their political representatives. They were forbidden to grow valuable cash crops. They were neither men nor women. They were natives. And in everything they did, they faced a color bar.
Let's be blunt. The Europeans number 1, Asians number 2.25, Africans number 4.5. They had no status at all. They were laborers, they were servants, they were what have you.
To the white settlers, this was home. They had created Kenya, and whatever Britain might want, they were determined to stay on top.
In 1922, Churchill gave the settlers a promise. He said, this land is yours, the settlers, in perpetuity, not only for you, for your children and your grandchildren.
Originally, Britain wanted Kenya only as a link to areas deeper inside Africa. The Kikuyu, the largest tribe in Kenya, had been reduced to a narrow tribal reserve. Hemming in their growing population were the White Highlands. The capital, Nairobi, became a magnet for the Kikuyu, the most energetic and commercial of Kenya's tribes. While the British advertised farmland for white settlement, Kikuyu land hunger in their overcrowded reserve became intense. Among the tribes, they led the agitation for political change.
In an effort to change things, they now threw their support behind a mass nationalist movement, the Kenya African Union.
The political activity were terrific. We have aroused the political enthusiasm of the people throughout the country. in order that they should fight for their rights.
But Kenya's white settlers were also impatient after the war. They were less than 1% of the colony's population, but for half a century, they had dominated its political and economic life. They had no intention of letting their mother country, Britain, sacrifice their interests to the cause of African self-determination.
Their objective was to hold on to Kenya, which had the largest European population amongst the 3 East African states, and to make this a white man's country. That was their objective. It was the objective of the settlers, and they were supported by the British government.
When you consider that the people here in Kenya, the masses of the Africans here in Kenya, are probably roughly about the same stage Great Britain was 500 years ago, we do not think that normal forms of democracy are suitable.
And welcome back. Zimbabwe will hold 9 by-elections on Saturday with opposition candidates largely absent as President Emmerson Mnangagwa cements his control over the mineral-rich nation. A political crisis has been growing since a group of MPs within the main opposition Citizens Coalition for Change had their seats declared vacant. Now, courts ruled on Thursday that most of the CCC contenders could not stand in Saturday's vote. Let's listen in.
Zimbabwe's ruling ZANU-PF party has rallied its supporters to vote in Saturday's upcoming by-election after a high court on Thursday barred most opposition candidates from running. The ruling party now eyes a supermajority in votes without opponents following the latest court ruling. There is a lot of infighting within the opposition, and this has given us an opportunity to contest in the by-election. A political crisis has been growing since a group of MPs with the main opposition CCC had their seats declared vacant in October. The case has sharpened political tensions in Zimbabwe. The opposition is controlled by a lot of external forces, like the EU and the Europeans, as well as the Americans. And this ends up confusing even Chamisa himself, the leader of the main opposition. Barring a Supreme Court reversal, the ruling ZANU-PF will now pick up some easy seats as it moves closer to changing the constitution.
And welcome back. More news in just a short while. But before that, we will be looking at Africa's Top 10 segment about the hits and misses of Africa. Well, this week specifically, the hits and milestones of the great healthcare systems provided by the countries and cities across Africa. But before that, Robert Jenrick has resigned as Immigration Minister, saying the government's emergency Rwanda legislation does not go far enough. Now, he said stronger protections were needed to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges which will risk paralyzing the scheme. The government said in a bill, this is the UK government, said in a bill unveiled earlier, made clear in UK law Rwanda was a safe country for asylum seekers, but it stopped short of what some of the top right or Tory right were demanding. Let's listen in.
At Prime Minister's questions in Parliament, Britain's Rishi Sunak faced criticism from the opposition Labour Party over his controversial plan to fly migrants to Rwanda in a bid to deter illegal immigration.
Apart from members of his own cabinet, how many people has the Prime Minister sent to Rwanda? What does he first think attracted Mr Kagame to hundreds of millions of pounds for nothing in return?
We will do everything it takes to get this scheme working so that we can indeed stop the boats. And that's why this week we have signed a new legally binding treaty with Rwanda, which together with new legislation will address all the concerns that have been raised, because everyone should be in no doubt about our absolute commitment to stop the boats and get flights off.
Britain's Home Secretary travelled to the East African country earlier this week to sign a treaty in a bid to revive the controversial proposal, which was blocked by the UK courts.
Now, with a few days to the 2023 CAF Awards on Monday, CAF has unveiled top 3 nominees for all categories of the CAF Awards. The ultimate winner of each category is decided following votes from a panel consisting of CAR Technical Committee, media professionals from member associations, head coaches and captains of member associations and clubs involved in the group stages of the inter-club competitions. The awards gala will take place on Monday, the 11th of December 2023 at Ralais des Congrès Movenpick in Marrakech, Morocco at 1900 local time.
Just a few days before the 2023 CAF Awards on Monday, December 11th, the Confederation of African Football unveiled the top 3 nominees for all categories. In the men's category, Victor Osimhen of Nigeria, who just won the best player with the Italian Football Federation, tops the list. Osimhen scored 31 goals last season and currently has 6 to himself. Liverpool's winger Mohamed Salah also made it to the top 3, with the Egyptian currently being the second top scorer this season with the Premier League. Moroccan Achraf Hakimi, who features for the French Paris Saint-Germain, will also be among the 3 best players to be voted upon next Monday. Hakimi helped the Atlas Lions of Morocco last World Cup to reach the semi-finals of the competition. In the women's category, we have Azizat Oshoala from Nigeria, Thembi Gatlana from South Africa, and Barbara Banda from Zambia. The final winner in each category is decided following votes by a panel made up of the CAF Technical Committee, media professionals from member associations, head coaches, captains and clubs involved in the group stages of inter-club competitions.
Time for Africa's top 10. Now, in terms of healthcare, governments face a number of challenges, including lack of funds for infrastructure. Of course, this is compounded by epidemics and poverty and brain drain of the homegrown doctors moving abroad in search of higher wages and a better standard of living. Varying widely, of course, from country to country, region to region, and the public healthcare system does exist. Most experts will want to use the private health sector, often based in large cities and major tourist locations, or have the international health insurance and funds to be evacuated to another country. Now this week, we delve into the hailed cities of Africa, providing quality, top-notch healthcare systems to residents across Africa. This is Africa's Top 10.
This week on the show, we take a look at the healthcare system. We scout the African continent and African cities providing quality healthcare. These 10 African cities have done an exceptional job in providing the best healthcare systems so far in 2023. Join in on the discussion on Africa Vision Voices show by tweeting in your feedback as we dive into this discussion. This is Africa's Top 10 with Africa Vision Voices in conjunction with Amani Media and Good News Productions Africa.
Quality healthcare isn't merely a service, it forms the foundation of human capital development.
is an effort to invest in all the elements of a health system, from service delivery to research and decision-making around data, to developing prevention efforts, to setting up policies that can be sustained and endured over the course of different political environments.
In Africa, a continent contending with various health-related challenges, the importance of robust healthcare systems cannot be overstated. From infectious diseases to limited access to medical resources, the journey towards comprehensive and accessible healthcare has been challenging. Yet, amidst these challenges, a transformative shift is underway in certain African urban centers, where healthcare progress is on the ascent. In these cities, state-of-the-art hospitals with modern technology are becoming the norm, ensuring residents have access to high-quality medical services. Nambio, a platform that provides up-to-date information about the cost of living, quality of life, and various socio-economic factors across cities and countries worldwide. In an updated health index report revealed African cities doing well in this regard. The healthcare index itself is an estimation that evaluates the overall quality of healthcare system, including factors such as healthcare professionals, equipment, staff, doctors, and costs. It provides an assessment of the healthcare infrastructure, services, and resources available in specific locations. Cape Town, South Africa. The healthcare system in Cape Town, South Africa is managed by the Department of Health, consisting of two parallel systems, private healthcare and public healthcare. Full-paying patients in the private system include those receiving treatment from private doctors or being funded externally, as well as non-citizen expatriates while eligible to use public facilities are required to pay the highest billing category. Partially subsidized patients receive partial coverage for the healthcare cost based on their income. Fully subsidized patients, mainly individuals with low incomes, are referred to hospital by primary healthcare services. There are also occasions when certain medical services are provided free of charge, such as nearly 3,500 clinics offering free healthcare to pregnant women and children under the age of 6. Nairobi, Kenya. In Kenya, the healthcare sector operates under a decentralized system, with county government responsible for managing healthcare facilities. This includes supervising healthcare facilities, pharmacy, ambulance services, and promoting primary healthcare. County government also regulates food establishment and veterinary services. The healthcare system operates on 6 levels, with the first 5 managed at the county level and the 6th overseen by the national government. Funding for the healthcare sector comes from 2 sources, county allocation and private funding. The government provides around 30% of healthcare budget, mainly supporting the public sector services. Private funding, which accounts for 35.9% of healthcare expenses, serves as the 20% of the population with access to private healthcare services. However, these funds are not readily available for the decentralized units. Johannesburg, South Africa. Johannesburg and Cape Town are both well known for their excellent public hospitals. Additionally, public hospitals that are associated with major universities offer a high standard of care. Public health care in South Africa is subsidized by up to 40%. Algiers. The public healthcare system consists of 185 hospitals and 13 university hospitals, not to mention polyclinics and healthcare centers. Moreover, the country hosts 91 functional clinics, which can accommodate some 2,000 patients. Some clinics are also being constructed while others are still in the pipeline. Note that the most physicians and hospital staff speak French, both at the public and private levels. The public health system is financed by an inclusive state contribution, along with the National Employee Social Insurance Fund, This is how curative and preventive healthcare in terms of consultation, medicine, hospitalization are provided. In the private healthcare system, however, healthcare services provided are taken in charge by the patient himself. Finally, foreign employees in Nigeria are also eligible for Social Security. But it is recommended that they subscribe to a private healthcare insurance, which cover 80% of medical expenses incurred in public hospitals or healthcare centers. Tunis. The Tunisian National Health Insurance Fund follows the French model to provide healthcare coverage for Tunisian employees and expatriates. Self-employed individuals can also enroll in a separate plan. However, tourists do not have access to Tunisian health coverage. The Tunisian healthcare system offers comprehensive coverage for families, including healthcare medication, work accident, and maternity leave. Insured individuals can choose from 3 plans for outpatient. Lagos. Although healthcare provision is better in Lagos than in rural areas, it is not always free and may involve a long queue to see a doctor. Vaccination against diseases are available for children, but they often have to be paid for. Investment in healthcare are not matching the rapid population growth of Lagos. Residents, particularly in squatter settlements, are at risk of diseases such as typhoid and malaria. Many doctors and nurses have relocated to countries that are more economically developed, such as the UK. This brain drain puts considerable stress on healthcare provision in Lagos. Additionally, many wealthier people seek medical help abroad. Egypt. The Egyptian healthcare system is pluralized, comprising a variety of healthcare providers from the public as well as the private sector. The government ensures a basic universal health coverage, although private services are also available for those with the ability to pay. Morocco. Morocco has a public and private healthcare system. The majority of healthcare units in the private sector are located in Casablanca, Rabat, and in other larger towns. Outside larger cities, healthcare services are limited. The level of healthcare is not the same as in Europe.
Very insightful. Now time for your say. You can always talk to us on Twitter at Msakali_real, GNPI Africa, on Facebook, Imani Television, and on YouTube, Imani Television Kenya, where we build your faith in Christ Jesus. Time for our featured guest on the show tonight. Now, this week we host Joram Mwinamo. He is a strategic consultant. Now he shares his insights about the biggest problem in Africa, his thoughts on the African education system, its challenges and associations with the European culture. What are the notable downsides? How do we get through them as a people of Africa? And how do the youth and the population realize the immense potential that's vested in Africa?
I was born in a city called Embu, which is not so far from Nairobi. And I think I spent a large part of my initial years there until I was about 10 years old is when we moved to Nairobi. After that, I spent a lot of my time in actually 2 different schools in Nairobi. So I went to Lavington Primary School and I also went to Nairobi Primary School. So and finished my primary school in Nairobi Primary School, and then I went to high school called Nairobi School as well. So which is just on Waiyaki Way. And so most of my life has been in Nairobi. After that, I did my university in Egerton University, which is in Nakuru, Njoro, near Nakuru. And then I graduated with a degree in computer science. But never practiced it since then. I shifted my career in a different direction of leadership and business management, because that's something that I spent a lot of time doing in university, in a students' organization called ISEC. So that kind of ended up shaping the career that I took later, because I spent a lot of time traveling to student conferences across Africa, across the world. So all those experiences made me prefer taking a career that was more in the direction of working with people rather than working with computers. Then I attended 2 international exchange programs after I graduated from university. So my first one was in Uganda. I was a project manager for a project that was running in in the middle of a forest near Kampala. And so the project was about helping people who lived in the forest ecosystem to find gainful ways of making money so that they don't cut down the forest. And then after that, then I moved to Norway for another almost 1.5 years on a different role as an international business manager, which was more a business development role. And then that was up until 2007. And then I came back to run a business that I had co-founded with a friend of mine in 2004. And so that's a company called Wild International, which is today a strategy consulting company. Although that time we started out doing trainings, especially in the area of youth leadership development, and then moved on to training adults in companies, and then eventually started doing consultancy in strategy And then eventually we focused on doing strategy consulting for entrepreneurs. My career in Wild continued up until 2020, where Wild gave birth to another business, which is basically bringing other consultants together alongside Wild, and that's what today is now known as the Sandbox, which is spelled SNDBX. And so that's a new business that now I moved to become CEO of Sandbox in 2020 and left Wild in the hands of another, my co-director, who's a CEO there. And now I oversee Sandbox, which has Wild Plus today another 32 consultancies, and our focus is really helping entrepreneurs to grow their business. So yeah, that's what I'm doing today. What I find to be the deep-seated problems of Africa, a lot of them stem from the history, and I would say recent history of Africa. Recent history, I would say, from the 1800s, which is basically that most Africans, first and foremost, go through an education system that was not created by their own people. And so you'll find that a lot of Africans will go through studying African history from the perspective of two main things. One, which is slavery, and then the other one, which is colonialism. And both are, in my opinion, very negative perspectives of looking at the continent from, because Africa first has a much longer history and even positive history of discoveries, inventions. So you'd find that a lot of the kids who will go through school will study an African history that tends to emphasize the slavery and colonialism. And also, if you go back in history, you'll find out that that same curriculum was not created by Africans themselves. And so there are things that are highlighted in that African history that, in my opinion, are very misleading as to what the real history of Africa is. If I'm to mention, several things, one is that a lot of the education curriculums will tend to paint the people who are at the forefront of, during the changeover from colonialists to local administrators. You'd find that a lot of them are painted as heroes, and they're called, founding fathers and the like. But if you study alternative history about those founding fathers, you might find that they were not as heroic as they are painted to be. There are things they did that were not very desirable in collaboration with the colonialists that basically sought to maintain the systems that the colonialists left behind. So they continue to benefit, the colonialists continue to benefit economically, socio-economically, and continue to have a lot of power in the political systems of the countries that they left behind. And therefore, while it seems that the Africans took over, in leading the nations from, say, the 40s to the 60s or 70s, in actual sense, the colonial powers continued to have a lot of influence in how that changeover was done. Also, a lot of things that happened during the changeover, Kenya, for example, the government received money that was supposed to purchase land and hand it back to indigenous people, but that land ended up in the hands of elites who continue to own that wealth until today. So I think there's a lot of things that people grow up being very misguided about concerning our history that then shapes certain narratives that are not true about ourselves. If you go back to African history before the 1800s, Africa has a huge history of contributing to, I would say, global knowledge. But you'll never find this in history books. And so what a young African will grow up believing is that Africans have always been at the mercy of other people. They've always been subject to other powers, which is not true. And what that does to the mindset of a young African is probably make them not believe in themselves, believe that they can make, they can create, they can conquer, that they contributed to a lot. I remember all my science and history books and even geography books painted all the discoverers as Europeans, as if Africans did not live next to the physical features. So it also paints a perspective that things are only legitimate when the Europeans decide that, you know, they are legitimate. And so I think a lot of that education, and it has not been changed to date, and I think it's very harmful for Africans to grow up believing that only white people matter, only white people discover things, only white people, you know, do meaningful things. Yet a lot of black people have contributed a lot to the world's history, and it's not recognized anywhere. So I would say, back to your question of what are the deep-seated problems. The first one is just our mindsets that have been shaped through false narratives in education, which our educators seem to have embraced and, you know, don't find a need to change, and I find that a huge problem. Kenya has revised its curriculum in the last 3 years, and they used foreign consultants to do a lot of that revision back to the whites. And I think Japanese and Europeans feeding into that, rather than, I'm like, don't we have educators here who can decide what the philosophy of our education is? So you can see how deep-seated the lack of self-belief is, to the point even the people running the education ministry will first run to foreigners before coming to ourselves to decide what is important for our kids to learn, what needs to change in the education system, what needs to change in the curriculum. And from my interaction with, you know, other Africans, it seems that this didn't happen in Kenya only, it happened in other countries as well. And so you find that that problem tends to be even more pronounced in French-speaking West Africa, where that self-belief and self-esteem is quite low. And so, yeah, we need to change our self-esteem as a people. We need to change our philosophies about how much we believe in ourselves, where we go looking for solutions in terms of our self-determination, our self-governance. All that needs to change for African people to step up and, you know, take charge of both their own land, their own education system, their cultures, and how they interact with the rest of the world on the basis of all the different things that I've mentioned earlier. Yeah, I have had the privilege of traveling to a lot of countries, whether it's the US or in Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia. So I've had the opportunity of interacting with other people in their own countries and getting a sense of what they think about us as Africans. And in my opinion, you know, some of it is very annoying when they find an African who seems intelligent, exposed, and understands world issues. It's a surprise to them that we would have that level of exposure and intelligence. A lot of people tend to only have a picture of Africa that paints problems, drought, hunger, war as the norm, because that's all they've seen on TV. And so when they get to interact with you know, different Africans, they get very surprised at how there are, you know, very many different things happening on the ground. And so my experience, particularly in Europe, is what I would say started to drive me to want to come back home and make a difference, because I couldn't understand why a continent that has the best natural resources, best physical features, best weather, and largest number of people would also be the poorest. So for me, there was a big disconnect between what I could see on the ground and how I would see it playing out in terms of economies that are in Africa. And that made me very curious to want to understand, how did we end up in this situation in the first place? What are the different things that drove us. And that's why I got very interested in understanding why our education system is the way it is, why history that we learn is structured the way it is. And, you know, I'd even ask myself who came up with it and why hasn't it changed to date. And I realized that the way everything was structured serves one person or another's agenda. And most of the time it's not the African's agenda. So while for the last 50 years we have had leaders who are our own Africans, I don't know that in majority of the decisions they made, they were looking out for the Africans, or they were being controlled by foreigners who had interests here and who continue to have interests here in Africa until today. And so I think we need to uproot quite a number of things, and it may be to the displeasure of people in other continents for whom the current status quo, you know, helps either to become wealthier. If I give examples of Kenya again, we are known for the flowers we produce, we are known for the coffee we produce, the tea we produce, horticultural products, but it's almost as if we do this for other people, not for ourselves. We are also known as primary producers. The value addition happens in another continent, and then the products come back and we buy them as finished goods here for much more expensive prices. And so such structures only continue to make the situation worse when it comes to impoverishing the continent, because the money is flowing out, it's not staying here. And it's not that doing a lot of these things is rocket science. We could insist as governments that the value addition to coffee, tea, and everything else happens here, and that they have to buy directly here, either set up the factories here or not buy at all. But you know, that's not the case today. So our Sandbox, you know, driven by that history, one, we are very passionate about helping people discover the real African history, help people discover that that greatness was an African thing. We had kingdoms, we had wealth, we had education systems, we had health systems, we had, you know, all sorts of agricultural systems that had been discovered and found here, and that even a lot of things that happen in the rest of the world, people had to come to Mesopotamia, Timbuktu, to find that knowledge and go back and use it. But the role of Africa in generating that knowledge is never acknowledged on a larger scale. So we are passionate about helping people find out these things, find out that great history, find out that there are parts of Europe that were colonized by Africans in the early 1600s, so that it's not just a perception that Africans were always the ones who were enslaved and colonized. I found out recently that there's a Roman Empire who was actually an African and passed on in the UK. If you looked at the geographical area, but was born in Northern Africa, you know, went into the Roman Empire, grew all the way until he became a Caesar, and he was black, and then moved to Northern England, and I think died there when his, you know, rule came to an end. We don't ever hear about these stories. So we are passionate about first finding out about that African genius. They say until today the wealthiest man in the world was Mansa Musa, who was in West Africa. And that even until today, if you equate the wealth that he had, nobody has surpassed that wealth that he had then. Again, you never see that in any history books. So why is it that, you know, that we as Africans are not finding out this information quickly enough and making it available for everyone? So as part of our brand, we are passionate about highlighting this information, but also helping present Africans find out that they have an inherent greatness that if they are able to discover and put out, then they can be able to go out and do equally great things as what the rest of the world is doing. Of course, we focus on helping businesses to grow. So one of the things we challenge the businesses is asking them why they have a very small vision to just build a business that, you know, only impacts themselves and not the rest of society. I don't see a lot of Africans setting up a business and saying, I'm going to set up a global business. But when people set up businesses in Silicon Valley, Europe, or Asia, they think about it as a global business. Why don't we as Africans, start out with that kind of thinking? It's because, we have a very low self-esteem and don't believe in ourselves enough to think that we can come up with solutions that, impact the rest of the world. And so I would say our mission is to help people find out that they have that greatness, find out the different ways that they can go about implementing it, that, it's not rocket science to do those kinds of things. If you set your mind to it, you can be able to do it. And so we work with different African-founded businesses to help them build the structures that they need to grow, to build a good brand, to scale, and to grow across the continent and even across the rest of the world. Because I think until we start to do that, then we will not have economies that, build wealth for the local Africans. We will not be able to generate the kind of wealth that is synonymous with the land and the resources that we are seated on.
Very insightful. Be sure to catch the second part of this discussion, of course, next week on Africa Vision Voices. Well, that's just it for this week's episode of Africa Vision Voices. I certainly do hope that you did know something about Africa and how you can change and make this space impressive in the now and in the days to come. I'd like to leave you with a quote from the great Kwame Nkrumah. He says, "Yet all stock exchanges in the world are preoccupied with Africa's gold, diamonds, uranium, platinum, copper, and iron ore. We have been too busy nursing our separate states to fully understand the basic need of union rooted in common purpose, common planning, and common endeavor." Let's learn from the great wisdom of Nkrumah Kwame. God bless you, and God bless